Oh, sorry.
We are on with Dana Curtis and Johnny Livesay. So welcome to Cooperative Vermont, and from all the way from Austin, Texas. You guys are both involved with Black Star, the cooperative pub and brewery that we've been all talking and hearing so much about lately. So would you guys like to introduce yourselves a little bit?
Sure. My name is Dana Curtis, and I am the business team leader at Black Star Co-op.
And I am Johnny Livesay, and I am the kitchen team leader at Black Star. I'm also on the board of directors for Black Star.
So, do you guys want to give a little background as to the brew pub got started organizing in 2006? So, like, what were the origins of the project? How did it come about?
Sure, I'll start. So Black Star originally was the idea of a guy named Stephen Yark, and he called a meeting in January of 2006 to start the Black Star Pub, which is what it originally was called, which the flyer said Co-op Beer Bar. It was pretty loose on this flyer. And there was one of my work, so I went to that first meeting, and at that meeting was also Jeff Young, who is our current brewer, who actually is leaving in like a week and a half or so. And it kind of just went from there. There was about 12 to 14 people at that first meeting in the field. We drank a bunch of beer and kind of just talked about what a community beer bar looks like. And at that meeting, we kind of just suggested like maybe it should be a cooperatively owned bar, and maybe it should brew its own beer, and that kind of evolved into this idea of pub and brewery rather than just a community owned beer bar. So over the next 2 months or so, we started working on bylaws, and Texas had just adopted a new co-op statute about 5 or 6 months before that. So we filed as a cooperative association. We got our stuff together. We gave the state $25 and had a party, and we took some checks and signed our bylaws and had our first couple of members. I think it was like 12 of us, and that was in April of 2006. And then after that, we just started doing some fundraising and having parties. Eventually, we put together a small brewing operation to test some batches out for what would potentially become our beer down the road. And by doing that, we started having kegs of beer. So we started throwing these parties called beer socials, and at the beer socials, we would sign people up to be members and kind of just talk about what the idea was that we had. All the while, it was expanding from really simple, brewing cooperative to this like social justice-based kind of participatory economics thing that it's turned into now. And over that first year, we really kind of laid the course for what we do now. All the while, it just being theory, and we're just getting people to give us money based on this idea. And we did that for about 2 years until 2008. We started entering into a real estate contract with a space. We did a small round of investment shares, got like $50,000, and then spent pretty much all of that negotiating a contract that fell apart. Right, kind of in the middle of the year, we had this big meeting and like chose a location, and then it all kind of fell apart, and that kind of sucked. And we kind of lost some momentum there. But then around beginning of 2009, we found another location that was a new development on our new little kind of dinky chain line that they were getting started back in 2009, and started gearing towards that. And then in November of 2009, really kind of sealed the deal by announcing, hey, we're going to be in the space. We're working on fundraising. Dana got hired in January of 2010, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So she started, and I can give it to her there,
Okay.
Where she picked up the ball.
So, yeah, I was hired in January 2010 to oversee all of our member investment campaign, and that's how we raised all of our startup capital. We raised about $600,000 that way, and that's just getting members. We grew our members to about 2,000 before we opened our doors, and from them doing a Class B investment share. It's like a non-voting preferred stock where there's, to avoid SEC regulations, you have to live in the state and be an owner of the business, and then you can buy stock that doesn't hold any additional votes or anything like that can have a dividend up to 8%. It's capped by the IRS at 8%. So that's how we raised a bunch of money. And then we started construction in March of 2010, or maybe it was April.
May.
Okay.
And
then we did and then we just kept raising money and just working really hard. Everything happened so quickly. And then we did our soft opening in the end of August with our grand opening in December of 2010.
So one question I have about that sort of early phase, which is kind of where in Vermont and Burlington we're finding ourselves right now, is kind of were there certain pre-existing communities like the homebrewing community or activist community or co-op communities that got involved early on that sort of provided that initial membership base, or was it kind of this kind of more ad hoc, like just random people started popping up and coming out of the woodwork?
Yes, and I can speak to this because I was there, and so the two fastest early adopting groups were the cooperator groups from like housing co-ops and the food co-op here in town, and the activist group. The home brewer side of things, they were a little bit more skeptical. They're already loosely organized through SUDS, so as they call it. There's a group called the Zealots here in town, that's pretty much what they're a strange group of people, and we love them because they were really skeptical of us in the beginning. But there were a few homebrewers who were attached to the project like right away. I was homebrewing, Jeff was homebrewing, so there were some people, but the activists and the like cooperators really were the kind of first push. But then as it all started to meld, you could see like this isn't going to be this super radical like collective thing, and I think we lost some of the activist people as that kind of went on, and the cooperators kind of formed with the homebrewers to make these little homebrew co-op babies, and that's where we are now. I think it definitely early on, and if you're in this phase, you're gonna argue, you're gonna, someone might throw a beer at somebody. It's gonna happen, and don't be afraid to like have confrontational conversations. If you're really trying to like form an idea and be like progressive with something, you're gonna have to make people uncomfortable, and that level of collaboration really comes with some good ideas. I think that's like where we really succeeded, is that we're all kind of pushing each other, and came up with some pretty good ideas in the end result from that.
Can I say something too about those groups? That I think what's really awesome about Black Star is that we get people to come. People are interested in Black Star because either they care about local food movement, or they care about beer, they care about co-ops, or they care about living wage and good labor practices. But then through that, they're learning about other things. So maybe someone's just like, I like craft beer, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, but what's a co-op? Oh, and you mean environmental sustainability is really important. And so I really like that all these groups come together and we can learn things from everyone.
Yeah, and not everybody's gonna get along. And I think that, and that's something that, I didn't get along with the guy that was the co-founder for a long time, and then we got to be really good friends and collaborated at a really high level. So, if y'all are having tension, you're gonna have that, and that's actually really healthy, I think, for a startup, because the ideas are like in the room, and you're not gonna get like to the really deep level ideas until you like parse them out by getting drunk or screaming at somebody. I don't know. It's gonna happen. So just let it through healthy dialogue over screaming and drinking. It's all melded up together. You'll have the broad spectrum of all those conversations. I think that's it. Just be prepared for that. I think don't let people get their feelings hurt. I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's about business, and you should be professional and not emotional about it. You should have passion, but not freak out. Yeah.
So another question, sort of touching on that early stage, is, and you've been talking about it, is that the cooperative structure poses a lot of challenges, and people needing to work through these issues. What held sort of this venture together as a cooperative rather than sort of, a typical sort of sole proprietorship or a couple people going their own way? What sort of held it together as a as a cooperative venture?
In the very beginning, money. I was 24. I didn't have any money. Nobody else had any money. Co-op is really great for getting a lot of money from a lot of different people and kind of sharing that burden of equity across this like broad field instead of a bunch of people in their 20s who don't necessarily have money. Because the more we got involved, the more engineers started showing up, the more people who had stable careers started showing up. And then when we started to have people invest, they were able to provide some capital. And that's where our structure really is empowering, is that we are a consumer and worker co-op hybrid where we have all the management structure of a worker co-op, but the equity structure of a consumer co-op, so that we can kind of subsidize this really democratic workplace by having a larger equity pool to pull from. It'd be really hard to open this as a bunch of 20-somethings and try to get loans or have your parents give you money or all the things that worker co-ops have to do. Instead, we're able to have this community that's pretty large fund us. So in the beginning, we really had that as the idea of like, we really want to do this as a cooperative. It's a lot easier to like think you're going to open a bar by yourself, but that's pretty hard to do, especially in Texas. It's pretty expensive. So
also, I don't think that the cooperative model in itself is challenging. I think what's challenging is people aren't very familiar with it. Mm-hmm. But once they get familiar, there's so many resources. There's no reason anyone should be doing anything from scratch. We have a rich history of cooperatives that love to work together. That's one of the 7 principles. And so I think it's really just getting past this idea that people don't understand what it is, or they're scared that it's not going to work because they have this very traditional business and worker mentality. So the support is definitely there. Once you have to do a lot of education around it for people that aren't familiar.
So here in Austin, there's not a whole lot of cooperative businesses. There's a food co-op and then a bunch of student housing co-ops. So at that point, 8 years ago, we were kind of starting a new trend of trying to get some new lifeblood back in this Austin cooperative economy. Whereas in Vermont, I feel, having been to Vermont, and there's a lot of really well-established cooperatives, food cooperatives, and other types of cooperatives, dairy cooperatives. In Texas, you've got like rural electric co-ops, and then some granary co-ops, producer co-ops, but they're not until recently talking to each other. So in 2006, they definitely weren't like communicating at a broad level. So y'all might be in a better place than Austin in 2006 was, because Vermont's pretty cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that in that early phase that you mentioned, I wanted to dig into a little bit more is you mentioned kind of the parties as an organizing tool, and at the moment we just had our first brew day last weekend, where we brewed up 10 gallons of an IPA at my house, and had 15 people over, just kind of working and planning, and had a meeting and all that. And sort of our sense is to go forward basically with once a month gathering to brew some beer and drink the beer we brewed at the last meeting. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of like how those parties work, what spaces you used, what were some of the positives and negatives you guys encountered in that using that strategy?
Sure. So I'll start with the brew days, because those in themselves were a really good fundraising tool. And I feel like a lot of this stuff, we don't ever really talk about this stuff anymore at work or anything, because it's so institutional memory. It's like in my brain, and that's about it, and Jeff's. But we had a 55-gallon system. We bought 3 stainless steel 55-gallon drums and made a homebrew system out of that. So we were able to produce about 1.5 barrels of beer at a time, so 3 kegs every batch. And in doing that, we would produce 3 kegs, and then the rest we would send home with people who sponsored the batch. So we weren't selling any product, but the people who were already members of the co-op would buy the ingredients from the homebrew store to make the whole batch, and then they would each take home a 5-gallon carboy, and we had 3 people from each batch that did that. So we would make just under 3 kegs, and then 15 gallons of the beer would go back to whoever, homebrewer Joe, his house, and they would have their own beer also. And then there weren't many co-op businesses, but there were a lot of collective businesses, and this is where like when our early adopting like anarchist slash activist crowd was really active in the co-op and forming like the bylaws and all that kind of stuff. There was a space called Monkey Wrench Books. They had a small backyard. They're one of like the radical bookstores here in town, and we held probably our first year's worth of parties there, and that place probably maxed out at about 250 people. Once we outgrew that, we moved to a place over on the east side called Kenny Dorman's Backyard that did about 500-600 people, and then we had a really large party at our current space that was 900 to 1,000 people.
We had a couple of them.
Yeah, a couple, but where the train like brought people there, which was really cool. Like the train was not really running yet, so.
But also early on, we had block parties. Remember the block parties that
Yeah.
early members could sponsor and have at their house?
So you get like a 20 keg of our beer, and people come over to your house, and like you would proselytize about the co-op, and people would sign up for membership. That was the whole point, was getting people to sign up for membership, because that was our main source of capital at that time. We started off taking donations. We very quickly did some legal research and found out that that was pretty much selling beer, and that was a bad idea. And if we wanted to be a legitimate like business down the road, we had to have all our bases covered. So we quit taking donations. Everything was free, and then we just took your money when you signed up to be a member.
We sold pint glasses.
Sold merchandise. We could sell merchandise. We couldn't sell like buy a pint glass and get free beer kind of thing. It was you got free beer if you wanted to buy a pint glass and a T-shirt. You could do that. And that was pretty viable for a while.
So I think some of the pluses of that, and I come from a community organizing background, that's how I got brought into this, is that you don't have money when you're starting, so you really have to expand on your people capital, and that's your volunteer labor. And I think it's really important to have those regular meetings because it keeps people super engaged. And they're not like boring business meetings, they're fun, like we're building a community, and it's also been super helpful when we were starting because we've already opened with this sense of community. So we have high attendance at meetings and events because people are used to going to things. But yeah, because I think that you need to talk to people several times before they'll actually agree to give you money or maybe trust you enough to think that this crazy idea that you have is going to work. And so seeing people regularly really helps, and it really builds up a really strong volunteer base, because volunteers will come and go. They're not paid. They have other things that are happening in their life, so they're going to constantly be rotating out. So it's good to have a really good core group of people that are going to be able to do the work, because nobody's really getting paid at that point.
Yeah, so with the volunteers, we had a volunteer coordinator. That was we had like a few loose positions right out of the gates. We had a membership coordinator, someone who entered in all the data and sent out membership packets and cards, and made it feel like, yeah, I'm doing a co-op. Here's my membership packet. And then a volunteer coordinator that had a roster of about 80 people. They would assign jobs, work the door, sell merch, walk around and make sure people have water, all the like party duties. And we also have the board of directors, which is like the largest volunteer group, right? And so that's 9 people, but they have the most responsibility. They have the fiduciary responsibility. They're the ones who their ass is on the line if you get sued, if someone dies on the way up from one of those parties. They're the people that are going to get in trouble. Or a boulevard, one or two. And that's really important too, is figuring out what your board's going to be like, how that's going to work, and then just utilizing, like she said, all that human capital, because now 8 years later, when we have our member meetings, the 80 to 100 people that show up, half of them used to be volunteers and like work the door at a beer social or pour beer at they went out of their way to become TABC certified, which is our alcohol regulator here in Texas, so they could pour beers legally at this party once we were like a legal entity. So that's a very important thing too, is just to like social media, blast it out, keep that list current, and try to have somebody who keeps them all centralized. That way, as you have parties or events, one person is corralling all those people and keeping them motivated.
And we continue that tradition today by sending out a monthly newsletter, and we still have that once a month contact with everyone.
So when you mentioned kind of going from the sort of the informal, right now that we have no legal kind of existence, we're an informal network and that mostly exists on Google Drive. Like, so at what point in the process did you guys decide to go to move into sort of register as a co-op?
Right.
And when you did that, did you have at that point a clear sense of what the equity buy-in would be, or has that changed over time? Like, how did you guys determine that?
We originally it was $100.
No, it was $85.
No, it was $100, a $15 joining fee, and an $85 investment, capital investment.
Yeah.
So it was a $100 like sign up fee. $15 went like to it was straight just income. $85 went to straight equity. Although we were using all the money to do everything because that's all the money we had. So it's still like that's still the equity we have now. But there was a $15 joining fee. We've since like dropped every joining fee, and now it's just $150 in capital. But I would encourage you that even if you fail or the idea dwindles, you could still register, and that way there's some legitimacy behind it. And if it goes away, nobody's out anything. There's no like massive capital you have to put up with your Secretary of State to file as a business. You just basically do like a DBA. Which I think is like $500, and then or it is in Texas, and then incorporating is like $25. So that's like the most anybody's going to be out, until you start raising like serious money later on. But that way, there's a legal entity that you're working towards in a lot of ways that pushes the group to be legal in their interactions, like parties and things like that, to make sure that you're abiding. Because if you don't want to be like some wild and crazy group, and then later on, you're a serious business, people will take you seriously, and they're like, I don't know, these guys, we're going to watch them, because then that's not good for anybody. So we did it within 2 months. We had our bylaws written. We had like a lot of committee work. So again, volunteers. There were, bylaw committee, people that wrote the articles of incorporation, and then there was like a vision committee that just sat there and like talked about what are we going to do. And if you were at those conversations and you were at the co-op today, it's nowhere near the idea that we were throwing around 8 years ago.
At one point, they were talking about being a tiki bar.
A tiki bar in a field with a hut as like the bar because it was low capital and that would be what we could afford. And now we're like a $2 million business and we run a really good business, and that's like that wasn't even something we thought about 8 years ago.
No.
So
speaking of the
tiki bar.
Oh yeah, the tiki bar. No, the bylaws. So basically, the process that we've decided to do, we have a bylaws working group, and the working group is basically we've taken your bylaws and we've thrown them into a Google Doc and are just sort of having a comment period where people are debating different pieces of it, and so there are a few kind of things that people had some questions about, and I figured it would be interesting to get some clarification. Probably the biggest is that given most people in Burlington, we have City Market, which is has 10,000 member food co-op. So that's probably the baseline for a lot of people in terms of thinking about a consumer co-op. So the piece that's kind of the most unfamiliar and new is the workers' assembly idea. So can you guys talk a little bit about that and how it works and sort of what the intentions are behind it and all that?
Well, I guess before we talk about it, I'd have to ask: is that something that you're interested in doing? Because a lot of the people who have contacted us to form cooperatively owned brew pubs, they are still going about a normal hierarchical structure and aren't doing what we've done. So if you're going to go
like,
down,
as the conversation's gone so far, I think pretty much everyone who's been part of the conversation up to this point has been pretty on board with the idea.
That's pretty awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. So, what do you want to know about it? I mean, I guess that's the side of it is that we have. That's where the real fun of the co-op comes in. The real challenge too is that a democratic workplace is extremely empowering. It's a lot of work. It's not something that you can just like. You have to be very flexible and proactive. And be able to adapt as all the challenges come at you. When there's a problem, you're the ones that make the decision. No one's gonna tell you do this and that's what you do. You have to sit there and talk with each other and figure out what the best thing is. So overall, if you guys are interested in that, I very much support y'all in doing that.
So we just got back from the National Worker Co-op Conference, so we're like pretty stoked on worker co-ops and democratic workplaces right now. We got back on Monday.
Yep.
And I'm on the board of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. So I came to this to worker co-ops and democratic workplaces from being a union organizer. And I feel like, for me, worker co-ops solve a whole lot of problems that aren't addressed by the labor movement and really speak to what the changes that we need to see in our new economy and completely changing the way that we live our lives in this capitalist system. So for me, that's super, super important. I think when people have a say over their work, they're in charge of their day-to-day labor, they know better than anyone else what they do well and what they need to succeed and what their business needs. So it's really important for us. Also, we share a lot of the burden, and so we have a much more fair pay structure than someone that's a general manager that's getting paid a whole lot, but the frontline workers are not making anything. Johnny is extremely involved with ROC, that's Restaurant Opportunity Center, that's fighting to end the minimum wage for tipped workers. You can speak more about that if you'd like, but for us, Black Star wouldn't be Black Star without the way that we're structured, and our members feel that way too. It's very, very important to them that we're democratically managed, that we are paid well and have great benefits, and it's absolutely the best place I've ever worked, and I would never, ever go back to a traditional place where I had a boss.
Yeah, so when we started the co-op in 2006, I was working. I was a middle manager at the local food co-op, Wheatsville, and they're a great co-op. They do a lot of good things in the community. They definitely have that very tiered management structure. I had a boss, and her boss was the GM. Later on, my boss was the GM. And the GM made a lot more than everybody else, but significantly more. And they still, I don't think, pay that much more than minimum wage for entry-level employees. And there's a lot of turnovers, college town, so that happens. So I think one of the ideas that we had back then, there's a book, which this also doesn't get talked about very much anymore, but there's a book called Participatory Economics by Michael Alpert. And that book talks about workers having the power to basically identify what needs need to be met and what resources they can allocate. Sorry, work is texting me at this time.
We're watching work problems happen across the street. Sorry.
That's not good. Something's happening at work that I didn't see the first part of. So this book basically is saying, the workers allocate the resources to meet the needs of like production or whatever. So in our case, we do that. We don't ever really talk about it, but we're totally empowered to. We need to pay these bills, and we need to make this much beer. We need to make this much food. We need to make have this much labor to make this much beer and this much food, and to pay those bills. So we're doing what we set out to do a long time ago, and really a lot of that was a lot smaller scale in the co-op. That was really a lot more Stephen and I back in the day, like sitting there because we were the only people that had read that book, and we're like trying to figure out how can we work this into the structure and really make this as empowering as possible. And now one of my cooks is sitting right here next to me, one of my teammates, and I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. It's not easier. It's not any easier to have a democratic workplace. It takes a lot of really good communication. It takes a lot of just diligence and like knowing that the work is hard and being there for each other. It's a much more familial setting than a normal business. Even if you work in a normal business and you like feel like you're a family, you're a much tighter, much more dysfunctional family when you have a worker co-op, and it's really healthy, I think, in the long run, because people know that you're going to care for them, you're going to provide for them. So does Vermont have a minimum wage that's higher than the national minimum wage? I think it does, right? What is it? It's $8.10.
I think they just passed 10.10.
10.10.
Yeah.
So that's really great. First of all, so for us, a big part of it is getting the member, if y'all do the consumer worker co-op hybrid, is getting the consumers behind the idea that their equity and their patronage subsidizes a very small group of people's livelihoods. And I think that's something that we did a really good job of garnering when we were starting this, is that, now we have 3,400 owners, and there's 28 people that run this business and are the stewards of 3,400 people's equity. So they aren't going to make a ton of money ever from being owners of Black Star, but they are going to allow for myself and my wife, when we were both on insurance, to have insurance, or Dana and her son, or those types of things that a normal business isn't going to pay as much. And Black Star pays for 50% of non-workers' insurance. That's crazy, that people don't do that, but they allow that because they know that's the right thing to do, and that we are going to take care of their equity, and that's the other side. So if you can expand your net and really get your consumer ownership to be behind having a workforce that can be supported, that is going to end up meeting their needs by having good food and beer, you'll be able to grow that business pretty quickly, because that'll catch on, and that's a really positive thing.
And it's really good for our member owners too, because we have really low turnover. So turnover rate for restaurant industry is 110%. Our turnover rate is like 40%, which is crazy. So our members are constantly seeing the same people. They really trust us. So I think it's good for everyone. It's really good for our business. We just started distributing last week, so now you can find our beer on tap around town. So we are now ramping up, and we are planning our expansion, hoping to have a large production facility by next year. Johnny's got to go handle work problems for a second. And so it's really good for us, and we're proving that this model works. It's good for our members, and it's good for us.
I think the worker co-op sort of and consumer co-op hybrid is a really, really interesting concept, and something we like to dig into on Cooperative Vermont is sort of how co-ops governance structures work. And I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how it works between the sort of the member consumer owners and the board of directors and the workers assembly, how sort of everyone interacts to create a shared venture.
Sure, I'm going to take this.
Okay.
Our board uses policy governance, which is like a trademark thing that some consumer co-ops and nonprofits use. It's really great. I really enjoy it. I'm also on the board of 2 other nonprofits that have to do with cooperatives, and we don't use those on the other boards. And I was on the Black Star board for 3 years. My term ended last year. Policy governance is really great. We start with our ends policies, and these are the main goals of our co-op. These are made by our members. And then we've got restrictions on the workers' assembly that says exactly what we should and shouldn't do, and restrictions on the board that says what the board can and can't do. And so in those policies, we are very strict about what is board work and what is workers' assembly work. So the members elect the board. They can run for the board. And they set these end goals. So our end goals are structured around worker treatment. Everyone must be paid a fair living wage and have excellent benefits and access to education. Environmental sustainability, which we are really leading the charge on. We're the first LEED Gold certified brew pub in the country.
In the world.
In the world. We only make 1 bag of trash a night. We recycle everything. Our spent grain is donated to a rancher, and his cows win these awesome beauty contests.
Compost all the food.
Yeah, we compost everything. And then we've got one about financial development that tells us to, take care of our business. We want to do that. All of us would be out of a job if we didn't. And then build towards a second location and plan for our future.
And patronage experience.
Yes, patronage experience. So we're charged with making sure that everyone comes there and has this sense of community and has an excellent time with excellent food and beer. And so that's what our members want us to do, and they're very open-ended. So that's up to interpretation by the workers' assembly. So the workers, we do all operational stuff. That's completely up to us, and we are an autonomous group that takes care of that stuff. So if the board says, we want you to use natural resources and protect our environment, we take that and we interpret it and say, hey, when we're doing our build-out, let's be LEED certified. Let's make sure that everything is low energy and that we have low water usage.
By wind power
instead of
regular power.
That's right. So those interpretations are up to us. But members can't come to us and say, like, hey, we want you to be a completely vegan kitchen. And Johnny, as the kitchen team leader, can tell you this is something that comes up quite a bit that he struggles with. So, and they can't come to us and say, like, we want to be an IPA bar, and we're only going to brew kinds of IPA or something like that, because we, as the people that are running this business and have the experience, know what's going to be best for our market and know what's going to be best for our members and what's going to serve our community.
So one other thing we haven't talked about.
The BSL.
Yes, BSL. Actually, what's funny is our co-op consultant is Mark Gehring, and he lives in Brattleboro in South Vermont, and he used to be the board president of their co-op for a long time. I've known him for like 10 years, I don't know, a long time. He's a great guy and a good resource, and inspiring to talk to at times, and that's really great. So the one thing that we do a little differently than a traditional consumer co-op, which is actually very similar to some other co-ops around the country, which is convenient because we can have a little support network, is that instead of having a general manager, because our structure is completely lateral, it's flat. So you get hired on, you have as much authority as me, who's been around since day one. Now I may have soft authority.
Kind of.
I may have soft authority because I've been around since day one, but that's something that I'm gonna feel more comfortable telling you my opinion than you're probably gonna be telling me. That's human stuff. That's not structural on paper stuff. There is a 3-month vetting period of like a trial period.
And a 1-year apprenticeship period.
And a 1-year apprenticeship, but the structure is still completely flat. But instead of having a general manager, we have a board staff liaison. So that position is a bottom-up compliance position. So we decided rather than a top-down, bottom-up compliance, it's a lateral compliance. So we elect that person, and then they're accountable to the entirety of the board of the workers' assembly, and they serve as the link between the board of directors and the workers. So the board isn't telling the workers, like 28 people, what to do. They're telling one person what to do. That one person then comes back to us and says, this is what the board wants us to do, and then the rest of us, we talk and we make it happen. And then we have team leaders. We have 4 teams. We have Dana's on the business team. They do accounts payable, payroll, accounts receiving now, a bunch of other stuff,
HR membership
social
administration,
marketing stuff, everything that
nobody else wants to do.
Well, everything that falls through the cracks, really. All the most important work that is the back end of running a business that's not part of the being a factory for making food and beer, which is the other side of it. So we make food, we make beer. So I'm the kitchen team leader. We're the biggest team. We make food. And then there's a beer team. They brew beer. And then there's a pub team. They give service. So that's their product. So each one of those teams has a leader, and then we all meet every Monday with the BSL. And she is the chair of our little council of team leaders. So we are all accountable to our teams. Even though we're the team leaders, I don't have authority over my team. My team has authority over me, because if I mess up, they can come down on me. But if they mess up, I'm the one that's like, hey, y'all messed up, So and that's a structure that we've worked on a lot in the last 2 years, and that has actually been very beneficial. Our oversight and our financials have gotten a lot better, and we've just tightened up our business significantly by having this small group of people do work on behalf of everybody, because not everybody has time to go to meetings all the time, but the 5 of us are dedicated to that. We have administration days where we have to sit there and lots of meetings, and it's good because we're also people who are the most comfortable with the numbers and all those types of things. So the BSL position is really important because she comes to every board meeting. She's the one that writes the monitoring reports, which if y'all look into policy governance, you'll see that's the point of it is that you write a policy and then you check in on the policy by monitoring that policy.
She also is able to ask other people to do those. Sometimes she's just too busy, so she's like, hey, will you write this monitoring report for me? And so
she's accountable for them.
Yeah, she's accountable. And then she also sends them out to the rest of the workers to approve before she sends them to the board. So she's never just working in a vacuum, Everything she does has to be vetted by the workers before she can communicate to the board.
So that's where we've created a lot of checks and balances at the worker co-op side of it, where we run a really good business, and that's something that I feel really proud of. We're getting better all the time. We're still really young as a business as far as being open. We may be 8 years old, but we've been open for 3.5 years, and we make we've been making profit, and we've paid out 2 dividends to our investor shares the last 2 years, and that's huge. That's a big deal for us to be able to say that, because people, even at this conference, we're talking to people and they're like, how do y'all even do this stuff? We're trying to keep the lights on, because we run a good business, and first and foremost, that's the most important thing. And then that shows your members that they can trust you as stewards of their cooperative enterprise, and then you can do whatever you want because they trust you, and that trust is like crucial in this whole thing. So, did we answer your question, or do we get off topic?
Totally, absolutely.
So one that I noticed when reading the bylaws that was really interesting and felt very unique was the neighborhood memberships.
Yeah.
Is that sort of something that has that has had any impact on the co-op, or what's the deal with that?
So the idea behind it is we're in a mixed-use development, so right across the street are people in apartments. And we just thought, hey, we really care about our community. That's why we do the business, we have the business that we have. So we would want them to have some kind of say. They don't really have a lot of voting rights. They can they can vote for the board of directors, but they can't run for the board of directors, and they also don't get any membership benefits.
Because they're not equity members.
Yes, they don't get free beer on Tuesday, like the member owner pint night beer or anything like that, or free beer on their co-op birthday. They don't get any of the benefits that you get for having put in your full equity. But if we were to say, like, hey, you know what? We don't want to be a brew pub anymore. We're going to be a shot bar, like on 6th Street. I don't know how familiar you are with Austin, but that's like a crazy part of town that's kind of like Bourbon Street every night.
Wherever the UVM kids go to party, that's what it is.
Okay. So, like, we're going to become a shot bar, and we're going to have someone standing out and, like, calling,
shots.
That kind of thing. Well, that would really affect them, because then they're going to have drunk people puking in their parking lot and peeing in their stairwell and all that kind of stuff. So we would want to really respect our neighbors and let them know, like, hey, if we were going to suddenly become I don't know, what else would be awful to have, like a...
Who knows? Think of a bad situation. That's pretty much the idea.
We're going to be a bounce house farm. I don't know. Like, whatever it's, they might want to know. They might want to know, like, that's going to be happening in their neighborhood. Now, honestly, has that program really worked? We don't have a lot of people that take advantage of that. It might be changing, because our mixed-use development is now not just apartments but houses, and so those people are going to be there longer and will have more of a stake. And hopefully they'll want to be, fully paying members, actually, and that's the goal.
And I think most of the people that live, that's the actuality, is that most of the people that are members that live in the complex haven't taken up the neighborhood membership. They've just become full-on memberships because they love what we do. So the reason why we did that initially, because we didn't have a location at all. It was a thing that we did when it was on paper. And it was another extension of the participatory economics, because a major tenet of participatory economics is allowing people who the impact of a decision affect to make that decision. Right. So if we're in a neighborhood, if we make a decision to be a shop bar, that really affects them. So they would have a voting say where, in some situation where I think it was like a quarter mile or whatever from our set. I forget what it is now. It's because nobody does it,
Yeah, it's not really used.
It's not really a thing. But the idea was that people had a say on things that could potentially affect their livelihood by how we run our business. That was the idea. So,
and that being said, that is something that we really could focus on and grow if we put some attention to it.
Yeah.
We could do more outreach and get people to join, and then hopefully get them to be paying, like, fully invested members.
Yeah. I think now most people just become members, and that's better for us in the long run.
So on the membership subject, it seems like you guys have done an amazing job, like, building this organic, like, sense of ownership amongst the consumer and member owners. How does that play out? Do you have a lot of folks that are sort of interested in running for the board, or how does that sense of ownership play out on the consumer and member owner side?
I think our members like to drink. They don't necessarily want to be on the board. And if maybe there was an opportunity for, we don't have, like, a huge run of people. It's awesome when we have contested elections. That's happened for the past Oh man, it's happened for the past like 4 or 5 years, so that's great. That's what you want, right? But yeah, there's not a ton of people running for the board in general. That's hard work, and they all know it. Our members know how much work that is. And so, but they would love to come to parties. We have like quarterly big, huge member, we call them member owner extravaganzas, which is kind of a silly name, but that's what the board has decided to do. And they love to show up to that. They love to show up to any kind of functions. So we try to have our member meetings be, you know, business, but then a party. We also give away a free beer to the first 50 people because we have to have quorum at our meetings. So that's really, we get quorum within like minutes because everyone wants to show up for that, you know, that free beer. So that's how our members feel a sense of community. And, you know, what's really great is we do an annual member owner survey, and we expect, you know, to get a small return, and we always get way over that. People love to give us feedback, and it's great that people feel the sense of ownership that they can do that. Even people that have never been to Black Star will still, like, I live in Wisconsin and I like the idea, still haven't been down to Austin yet, been a member for 5 years or whatever, will fill out the survey, even though they can't even say that they enjoy the beer or the food. They've never even tried it. But they still participate and just put not applicable on every answer. So it's really great, and I think we foster this continued sense of community because there used to be tons of volunteer opportunities, and now they're not. And that's one of the hardest things that happens once you go from, you know, your startup board that's less of a governance board and more of a working board,
yeah.
And then transitions into someone else is doing the work and they're getting paid to do it. That's a really hard bridge to gap. And so you've got to find ways to keep members engaged by, you know, having member events. Use your members whenever you can. So like we just started distributing. So I sent emails to active members and we're like, hey, will you go to such and such bar on Friday? They're releasing our beer for the first time. It would be great to have our member owners there to talk to strangers about our beer, you know? So our members like to drink. We're asking them to go out and drink our beer. That's easy. That's great for them.
I think it's important also to say that it was extremely organic, like you said. I think at the end of the first year of our being around, we had just over 100 members. By the time Dana came on, we had 1,000 members. And by the time we opened the door, we had 2,000 members, and that's in 9 months. And a lot of those people, honestly, were the people who were hanging back, who were like, this thing's never going to happen. And they came to all of our events. They drank all of our beer. They loved the idea. They just didn't want to give us a check. And there were people that I talked to, I mean, countless times, like, just become a member. And like, no, not yet. And then we had like a rush. And now
we also had a carrot. The membership equity was $85 before we opened. And once we opened our door, we raised it to $150. So people knew that that was going to be happening. And we also had be a charter member. And so people have a special designation on their membership card that they're a charter member.
And then it went up.
Yeah.
And then we've seen, I think, and this is actually really common in co-ops, is that since we've been open, it's a much more gradual rate of new members, because it's not like hundreds a month, this crazy rush of members that we were having before we opened. It's like, you know, we get 20 a month. Our front of house has to do the pitch in the middle of a rush on a Friday night where there's 80 people in line and they're like selling you food, and they're like, what's a co-op and what do you do? And they're like, here's a brochure. Come back and talk to me when you're not busy, you know, whatever. And so we get a lot less than we used to.
But on the other side, we do have joining rates because we wanted to make ownership available to a wide variety of people. So you could get started. Now it's $40. I forget. I think it was $25 or $20. Yeah. But you can get started for $40. You only have the right to vote for the board. You can't run for the board or get any of those monetary discount kind of things. But we have far less people joining at the $40 level. Most people are joining at the $150 level, which makes administrative work on my side really easy. We don't have to chase them around and get them to make payments. And so we have people are joining. We don't have as many people joining at the rates that we used to. Of course, what also helped is I was a union organizer that was hired to get people. So, and that was all my job was just chase people down. Yeah, I don't do that anymore.
At our last few big beer socials, her and a couple of her friends just running around, and we're just like, the clipboard's like, are you a member yet? Be a member. And then that really did it. Like, people were like, okay, I'm not a member. Here's a check. I don't know. Get out of my face.
hire an ex-union organizer to do your membership drive. So that'll help you.
So one other thing you mentioned was the board work being serious work, and something I noticed in the bylaws was again that it provided for board compensation. Do you compensate your board, and kind of like how does that work, and like what is the amount of work that they do?
The board is expected to do about
20 to 40 hours?
No, like 15 hours a month of work.
20 hours max.
It was way more when the working board, way more than that, because they're going to all the events.
It was like 50 hours a week.
Yeah. But now it's far less. But they get the same discounts that are offered to workers. So that's a free house beer for every shift that you work. For me, that's 5 times a week. Johnny, that's 5 times a week. You work 5 days, or you work 4 days?
4 days.
But so after a board meeting, that's considered a shift, or a board event, that would be a shift. So you get a free house beer. But other times it's 50% off draft beer, 50% off food, 25% off bottles and beverages and merchandise. So the board gets that same discount when they come in, and it's great because that encourages them to come in.
Yeah. So that's what we do. We don't pay our board.
Yeah.
All right.
And so at my food co-op, one thing that we have is the board gets compensated in member work hours, and there are certain benefits for being like a member worker. Do you guys have anything like that in which you kind of engage volunteers or have different tiers of volunteers?
Nope. We don't utilize volunteers unless there's like a
Party.
really special project, like help us make some software, or count the votes. Because the way we see it is that's taking a job away from somebody that we can hire. So we don't have any real volunteers anymore.
It's also, and this is, I've worked with volunteers a lot, and volunteers are great, but you have to have a paid person that's going to manage them. We're open every day, and we have to show up for work, so much that if you don't show up for work, you can get fired. Well, a volunteer doesn't have that, hanging over them. They wake up and they're like, you know what, I want to go see a movie today instead, and they can do that. But we're a professional business. Just because we're a co-op or that we're worker run doesn't mean that we're not extremely professional. Every person that comes in our co-op is either a member or a future member, and they need to see like the best possible person there. They need to be trained, they need to be educated. This is not, this is serious work. And that's why we don't. That's why we pay people. And also we feel it's amazing that we have 28 people in the Austin economy that are provided this great working experience, paid a fair wage, get paid time off,
benefits,
and that
have good beer,
and that have a job that like matters to the rest of the world and matters to and adds to their community and the cooperative economy in Austin. So it's really important for us to do that. I had a member owner the other day that was like, oh, I'm going to retire, you can hire me. And I was like, yeah, but then that means that someone else doesn't have a job that needs one. And that, like, I saw the light go on behind her eyes. She was like, oh, that's what we're doing here,
Yeah, also, we didn't say this earlier, so there's a 1-year vetting period for our apprentices, the new hires, and at the end of that year, you have to become a member, you have to have fulfilled all of your training expectations, and you get the right to vote. You get a wage increase, and you get a right to vote at the at-large meetings. So when we started, there were 4 of us, and now there's 20 out of 28 people who have been there for at least a year, and that's impressive to me because that's the most there's ever been. Obviously, it's a work in progress, and there's varying degrees of participation, but for the most part, it's a lot smoother than it could have been if nobody cared, and that's what you really get out of that sense. Like people have stewardship that they, I am a team leader for a kitchen, and in kitchens nobody cares because they don't have anything at stake. They can leave. It's a very transitory job in the industry, and I've got 10 out of 11 people who have been there for at least a year, and not everybody's doing financial statements or anything, but they are engaged at what level they can be engaged, and that's far more empowering than working in a kitchen somewhere else where it's yes chef, no chef, and they could get fired for burning a batch of bechamel or whatever. We give people a lot of opportunities to fail because we know that if we invest in them, they'll get better, and then we get better as a business.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have line cooks that know how to do business projections now that came in and just like to show up to work and do their work, but now they come to meetings and they're like, oh, here's what we did last month. Here's what our budget says we're going to do. I think, that this is the kind of money that we're going to make. This is how much we're going to sell. And they're completely engaged with this part of the business that workers are traditionally kept from. So they have a much more deeper understanding of what's going to happen. They care. They're like, hey, we said we were going to make, X amount of money this month. That means we really need to step it up. And people they really care. They're involved. They understand every facet of the business. So it makes it so much more important that they show up and are the best person they can be every day.
And we do open book finance, which is what she's talking about, which is a Jack Stack, The Great Game of Business is the book that came out of, which was a bunch of factory workers who kind of took over a factory when it was failing, and they started allocating resources and getting involved and making it kind of a game of like projecting and forecasting where they were going to take their business, and then meeting or not meeting the goals and then adjusting accordingly, and really being on top of their financial situation because the books were open and that everything was being shared with them. And Zingerman's in Ann Arbor actually does a lot of good training on open book finance because they kind of lead the industry in the forecasting and stuff that they do with open book finance. So we do that, and there's a big board in the office that has all of our numbers and projections, and you come in there to change your shoes before your shift, and it's on the wall. So it's kind of in your face all the time.
So you all mentioned when Black Star was organizing, there wasn't a lot of sort of co-ops talking to co-ops, helping each other out necessarily happening. And recently, I feel like there's been a lot of that happening in Austin.
Yeah.
With the co-op think tank and how so are you guys actively involved in that, or what's your opinion of the Austin cooperative economy presently?
Woo, okay.
Yeah, it's 8 years later. Things have changed.
So we are part of a charter program for the National Cooperative Business Association, and so we actually have their first regional office here in Austin. It's the Austin Cooperative Business Association. NCBA gave us $90,000, and the Austin cooperative economy raised another $90,000. So we've got an ED. We've got funding for a year. I'm the board president of Cooperation Texas, which is a co-op, worker co-op incubator here in Austin, where people can come and say like, hey, we have a business, we want to be a co-op, but particularly reaches out towards people that are traditionally barred from starting their own business, like immigrant women and people like that. So it's amazing. So a lot of people are really focused on Austin. Our board staff liaison is on the Austin Cooperative Business Association board, and I already said that I'm on the National Worker Co-op board as well. So yeah, people are looking at us. We're going around to conferences and talking. I just talked to the National Electric Co-op Conference last week. We're really connecting. We've got this annual conference in Austin called the Austin Co-op Summit, where it's co-ops from all over Texas that are really talking to each other. So what we're doing right now, which is really awesome, I'm not sure how familiar you are with these co-op development models, but we're not really trying to replicate the Cleveland model, the evergreen model that's happening in Cleveland, but what we're doing is looking at where our big anchor co-ops, which would be us and Wheatsville, our big food co-op that now has 2 locations, and there's tons of student housing and housing co-ops. And like, where do we spend our money? And could we develop worker co-ops that could fit those needs? So we spend a ton of money on like maintenance and repairs. So much. Things are always breaking. People drink at Black Star, so things are going to break. And mostly their toilets and things like that.
ACs,
doors and things like that. So we spend a ton of money on repairs. Well, so does Wheatsville. So do these housing co-ops. So maybe we need to develop a worker co-op repair service, handyman, general HVAC supply, or something like that. We're all doing laundry. Maybe we need a laundry co-op. So when Red Rabbit Bakery, a vegan donut bakery, opened, we came to them and said, hey, you're a bakery. We buy a ton of bread. We sell, we bought like 500 burger buns last month or something like that.
No, last week. We buy 580 burger buns a week.
Yeah.
A ton of bread,
Yeah, and then that's just the burgers. We'd buy
sourdough
bread
baguettes,
and baguettes.
hot dog buns.
Yeah, we went to them and said, like, hey, make our bread. And they did for a while, but unfortunately our growth completely outpassed their startup capacity. So we don't use them anymore. But it's things like that that we're trying to do. We're looking at, like, where are we spending money? And can we be spending our money with other co-ops? So that's where Austin is at right now. It's super exciting.
Yeah, and where we were then, it was basically like Wheatsville, the food co-op, and the housing co-ops. So we had kind of a natural future ownership group with the housing co-op kids. A lot of them were underage, so they didn't come to our parties. They weren't allowed to come to our parties, but they've all gotten older and they're all involved and leaders now currently in the cooperative economy that's kind of burgeoned out of all of that. And back then, you know, I was working in Wheatsville. I was really excited about Black Star, and Wheatsville provided like space for us to meet. But they
invested $50,000 in us when we started.
$50,000. But in the early stages, and I think it was a lot more of like growth, like mommy daddy thing. Like I have a really great relationship with the GM of Wheatsville, but he definitely was like skeptical about some of the stuff that we wanted to do, especially the worker self-management side of it. And we've proven that it works, and I think that that's really empowering because back then he was like, well, how are you going to make this work? And he pushed me to really make it work, and now it works. So it's awesome. Yep. And we hosted their worker party for a couple of years. Now they've outgrown us, just like the Red Rabbit situation where Red Rabbit, we outpaced them, they've outpaced us. They have 2 stores now. We can't fit 300-something people in our place at a time and be in compliance with the fire marshal. There are fireflies everywhere around us now.
It's really pretty outside, guys.
So things have just changed a lot, and there's been this unification, and now there's Cooperation Texas, which is a really great, you know, incubator for worker co-ops, and I think that's where, like she said, identifying needs and then starting co-ops that actually like meet the needs and can run a good business to accomplish that. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
So I think we're running towards the end here. I'm going to have to jet shortly. But one other thing that someone just sent me a message who's been watching and wanted to know about was the question of members who are sort of, you know, again, you know, people drink at your place. People are gonna get rowdy. So like in terms of member discipline or things where it's like if someone does something where they need to be removed from membership, like how do you deal with those kinds of more tough situations?
We've never had to remove anyone from membership. I think that would be unfortunate if it happened, but I think that's something you imagine happening, but doesn't really. I think that everything can really be solved by just pulling someone aside and being like, hey, we love you, and your behavior right now is inappropriate. That never happens at the bar. And we have so many rules that have to do with TABC restrictions. That's the Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission. That there's really cut and dry rules. Like I, as someone who can serve beer, do not want to get charged $10,000 if you go home and get in a wreck. So it's very cut and dry. There's nothing really to argue with about behavior when you're outside.
Yeah.
We've never had to remove anyone. We don't have.
That's a member.
Yes.
We have 2 people that are banned, and neither one of them are members.
We don't have to talk about that.
No, but that's
I mean, but that's just what happens
at bars. That's a bar, you know? It's a bar.
But our members are totally respectful. That's their business. So when their family comes in town, they're like, hey, you have to come to my bar. You know, like, we don't really have those problems. It's something you would like envision. Now, I'm not saying that at our early stages before we were open that we didn't have members that got rowdy, but it's super easy to just pull someone aside and just like talk to them respectfully like you would anyone, your family or your friends, and just be like, hey, I love you. We love you. You're important to our business and and the cooperative movement. And right now, you've had too much to drink and you got to go.
Yeah. So it's still not bad to plan for, like, you know, removal. 2/3 of the membership has to vote. I mean, who's gonna get, you know, what is that? It's like 2,800 people have to vote you off the island. That's never gonna happen, you know. But it doesn't hurt to have that provision. It's, you know, if someone does something inappropriate, you just talk to them, and that's it. They're all adults.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to fill us in on all this. This has been super helpful, and I think it's going to be really useful for folks processing kind of our next steps. Any sort of final thoughts or advice, given that you guys have trod this road?
Come visit us.
Yeah, come down here. Bring us some Long Trail if it still exists.
Get you some Heavy Topper.
I guess the thing that I would say is just be prepared for it to be hard work, and don't think it's just going to be like a lot of fun to like start this like thing. and like again, like I said in the very beginning, have tough conversations, collaborate, really push yourselves. If you want to do the worker self-management thing, that's a lot of work, but man, I totally support that. I think that's the right way to do it. I think that's just super important, and it definitely changes democracy on a small scale that you can't get in most businesses.
And my advice is to be super dynamic and flexible. A co-op exists to meet the needs of its members and its community. Members and community are always changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important. I think what has been so successful for Black Star, like we've definitely had bumps in the road. Think it's not easy to be the first person to do something and have, in a lot of ways we can model some things off of others, but a lot of ways we're just figuring it out ourselves, and at the same time have all these eyes watching you saying like, let's figure out if this works, and if it does, we'll start it ourselves. So it's a lot of pressure, and I think what's really saved us is our ability to think quickly, but also just really be able to figure out where we need to change and learn from failure, learn from mistakes. We're constantly evaluating everything we do and saying like, hey, what really worked and what didn't, and then the next time it comes up, we've learned our lesson, and just really be able to change. If you're going to be completely rigid in the way that you think that your co-op should be, you're going to get left behind because everyone else is going to be able to change.
Yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation with you if that wasn't the case, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we wrote the book more or less, and people keep calling us, and it's important that we are open and share and educate and do all of the things that we can do in our due diligence to like fulfill the cooperative principles and education and cooperation amongst co-ops. So, yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care.